Reflective Podcast.
Blessings, all who are present. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Fully Reflective Podcast. The intention for this podcast is in the name, fully reflective, to be fully present and reflect on whatever the topic is, but in a larger sense, it's the whole world. It's all that exists. And it's we ourselves as a living incarnation of all that exists. And we are the soul. The soul self reflects on itself. And when you're really shining, that causes this event, and we're calling that full reflectivity. So, fully reflective, here we are, episode 1. What a tremendous honor and privilege it is for me to be able to introduce this person. I do a little bit on the episode, but I felt called to come back here and do a little bit of an intro before the actual piece starts, because we kind of just jumped right into it with a fun kind of intro there. You'll see, you'll hear. This man, Paradox Pollack, came into my life in 2017. And as I mentioned, we met working at this youth organization in LA, just working with kids, and I was immediately infected by his passion for storytelling, but also his he was this archetype of a person that I hadn't really interfaced with before. He's like the jester, and he's like a clown in one moment, and then he's like this teacher. He's like Yoda, and then he's Jar Jar Binks. And it was immediate camaraderie. And it was also an immediate understanding, which for me somehow had something to do with working in the industry, working in some kind of a close proximity or deep wovenness with Hollywood. Growing up in the situation that I did, which if you're not familiar with that, maybe Google, maybe not. Hey, I don't care. But it's context in my lensing, and to me this is all sadhana. Sadhana is a word that one you can Google. It's a Sanskrit term. And he had interesting context. He had understanding of like who my father was and this like rock and roll like kingdom that I came from, but also he had full understanding of like just very specific references in the Bhagavad Gita and yogic understanding, and also like mystical, Christic understanding, occult processes, esoteric wisdom, insights, read a lot, spoke on a lot, articulately, and was also really able to recognize when he didn't have the information about the certain thing being talked about, and he'd ask questions beautifully. So that's a bit of an intro to this person named Paradox Pollack. It's a beautiful conversation. We dip and dive into all kinds of fun stuff. Enjoy. Man, what a blessing. Truly. Enjoy.
We are in process. We
were spiraling appendages.
Yes, we are spiraling progressively in progress.
Wow.
Whew. Just talk to me, man.
Man, so such a blessing to be connected here with you in this moment. No real like super formal, rigid way to go about this. I've been getting this call to do podcasts really as art form. Yep. Because it's like, and we've talked about it before, like long as you drink from a lens. Perfect. That's really all it is. It's about drinking from a lens. It's like this long form dialogue based exhibit of lenses. I mean, there's several things that we could dive into, but want to maybe share with those who don't have context as to, well, A, maybe who and where and what you come from, and then B, also how we kind of became appendage complexes in close proximity, and then maybe just like a tapestry that feels really potently relevant to zoom into with this format. So maybe just maybe just start by zooming us into I suppose an atypical way of talking about it is the origins of your lensing.
Okay. Well, when consciousness begins is a really interesting kind of like orientation. Where did my consciousness begin?
Right.
Where do I have these kind of station points of beginning in my network of context, and my first context, is Philadelphia, born and raised, to a family that believed in tradition, but was breaking with tradition because they weren't able to hold the form of family. And so I gained all of this beautiful insight from my father, who was a psychologist, was working at Great Efford Prison, doing group therapy, and worked on Skid Row. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and a loving woman doing her best, but really confused, trying to integrate the great 1950s version of what America, said a family should be, but that it wasn't happening for her, And so my father, who had been an Olympic level fencer and was teaching, was doing these, psychological experiences at Great Efford while I was, in my own little mythology, he would read stories to us every night, and we would get classical mythology. And then
I didn't know he was a fencer. That's great context.
Yeah, he was an Olympic level fencer. And for some reason, I can't remember the exact details, there was some reason that they were not able to get to a certain Olympics. Like they had the team, and he was like first, he was like in the first tier, and he was like ramped to get that gold, and then they weren't able to actually make it happen. Which so, but he was on that team in 1963, I think it was 64. Anyway, you get that sense of greatness, that desire for greatness. We get that from our parents, some great longing to be intelligent, to be clear about like our position in life, like the struggles that they had to overcome, they become a part of our story. And it's like both of my parents were immigrants. I'm first generation on my mother's side, who was born in Cuba via like Poland. Her whole family immigrated, avoiding the pogrom of Nazi Germany. So there's this legacy of where does consciousness come from, and I see myself in a lot of ways as somebody that's trying through story and storytelling and the physical body and the translations of mythologies into like the revealing of freedom from oppressions, the possibility of creating one's own voice in the world, how to clarify and kind of become more realized, both as a creator in the arts, but also as a somebody that as people, how do we get closer to the signal that really comes from our source, rather than all of the noise, but from the signal.
Powerful, beautiful, succinct. While listening, and also there was a nice background percussion palette that was like emphasizing your story as well. I feel like some context also, I don't know if I'm going to insert this at the beginning or what, but just like a framework as to how this is even happening here. Yeah, this is such a privilege for me to introduce this being that has come into my life to this format, to whoever is going to tune into this digital documentation of this. This man, this person, this being, Paradox Pollack has become such a a powerful reference point in my life for so many things. Artistry, integrated spirituality, embodied storytelling, emphasis on body, um, political identity, tribalism, um, tactile, philosophical, social engineering kind of identity conversations. So many different things, and we met just telling stories for kids. We met with a youth organization in the LA area called in Topanga Canyon area called Peace Guardians, and ended up transitioning both of us out of that space into our own respective paths. But I find myself in a Topanga Canyon cliffside view of just epicness, and who knows who these people are. Come to find out that this man next to me, like myself, has strived and had some snowball success in the film industry, storytelling on a really grand level. And I thought that was really interesting segue there, because I was immediately interested when I found out that you had a resume as such, because like my human earth father, some folks, they get that kind of touch of Hollywood and they never come back. They're like more and more Hollywood by the day. Some folks, they never touch the Hollywood, and it's almost like they have this fresh organic feeling about their being. Some folks touch the Hollywood, but they don't want to lose that organic being. And I felt that camaraderie there with you in that space, because there is something bright and big about, being in front of and behind the camera, and being on big sets and being in the big production of a storytelling situation like that. But where do you want to go? We got an hour or so. You want to dive into, like, I love that as a talking point of signal around that. We've talked about that several times, like signal being really what it's all about. And I remember you were one of the first souls that helped me see my medicine in these mirror sessions, which, I was Rocco, and then I'm sitting with someone that's moving through their system. And I swear to you, I'm not Rocco anymore. I am now this reflective, prismatic, electromagnetic mirror situation that's able to assist one in seeing the difference between their story and who they really are. And this language that you kind of permeated me with was signal versus noise.
Yeah.
I think this is a strong transition. Take the baton when it feels right, but something about, you talk about value, you wanted to talk about kind of not just money and Bitcoin and stuff like that, but there's a signal there. There's this signal in politics that's around, ideas that are really important to people, but then there's so much noise. There's interpersonal relationships that's like soul to soul interaction, signal based. Then there's noise, there's the drama, there's social hierarchy, just insanity bullshit that really prevents, I don't know, that's fair to say, most people from getting to the signal. Maybe do that. Maybe, wherever you want, but maybe
It's
at what signal is for a second.
it's I think it's beautiful, just to, like, again, like, once you kind of pull out this mosaic of references, like, I wanted to just start out with, like, my legacy and my family, because more and more as you grow older, I think there's a kind of, understanding that you're made of this stuff, and this stuff carries its own message, that the body itself is a conduit for a specific kind of information, that you can kind of dial in every frequency, and you can identify and move through every possibility in the universe, but that there's already a predilection, a kind of orientation. So it's like listening to the signal of my family felt really important to kind of bring out. But, like, it's very easy also to say, well, my signal is what I've done in the world, what I have chosen in my actuality, which you reference in terms of the Hollywood. And me, when I was coming up, we were doing um 3 shows a year in repertory. I was playing 6 roles in every show, this idea of being oneself is you're a shapeshifter.
Which just for context, this means in circus. This is what it was. You were in the circus.
It was in theater first. When I was in Philadelphia, we were doing radical, avant-garde, mad spectacle theater. With a group called Big Mess Theater, and I was there with my brother. We had run away from home when I was 14. I had almost died in a fire. I had done, 13 hits of LSD before we knew what it was. We were out on the streets,
Wait. How old from what era is this? I mean, what years?
1984 to 2000.
So 1984, you're how old at that point?
14.
You're 14 in 1984. So born 1970.
That's correct.
So 1984, you're 14. You've had, I think this is a profound moment as well, because psychedelics disrupt to traditional psychological persona framework. So you're 14, handful of LSD experiences in, but not knowing what that is. Do you even have the term LSD?
Well, I mean, I knew that what it was called, and I was, being bravado because I was saying like, I acted as if I had done it before when I hadn't, because I was being all like trying to be better than my brother. And we're out, on the town, and I've already got 4 hits in me. And I come to the Wooden Shoe Books, this anarchist bookstore where we were staying on the, having run away already, and having already, I stopped breathing in the fire. My brother saved my life, brought me out. Now we're traveling on the auspices and boon of, artists in Philadelphia taking us in. And, one of the people that took us in was this anarchist bookstore. So I'm daily sitting, reading, all of this anarchist literature, all of these, alternative views, Noam Chomsky, and like all these different things, like back in the day, like we're different viewpoints. And, a friend of mine says, here, take this. I take it. She's got a whole sheet. Over the course of the evening, we take that entire sheet of LSD, my brother, myself, and the two friends who we were also sometimes staying with. And, I mean, one of the things that I talk about consistently is, we've got a finite body with an infinite source. And that infinite source can be named spirit, it can be named soul, it can be named imagination, it can be named, and every tradition has its own name for it, but there is an infinity within that can be shaped from anything into anything and give meaning to anything in any way. And it's only like this physical form where we have sensation, we have memory, and we have the consistency of something that is pulsing every moment, that's breathing in and out, that has, a reminder of all of the history, as I've mentioned with the family, And when you touch that infinity, when you touch that infinite source, there's so many channels for what it can be. And I think that signal is essentially the channels for that infinity.
May I undulate that for a second?
Please.
Signal is where infinity meets a concentrated expression.
A focus.
It's where the focus occurs.
It's where the focus occurs. And in the midst of that focus, there are many things vying for what is true, what is real, what is actually occurring in that moment. And it is your level of focus to be able to isolate, parse, and layer out all that is not actually valuable to that moment in this context, this one and singular moment where we are called to our attention to give that singular focus. And that's the difference between signal and noise. There are so many things that want to call on your attention. When you're in that conduit space and you're being open for a mirroring session with somebody, there are so many things that want to vie for your attention as to what to say for this person. And you're moving everything out of the way that you can possibly do to just be present with their vibration with their necessity, with what they need at that moment, you know? And so much of the work that I do in Hollywood and have done in Hollywood is identifying, here's a script arc, here's a storyline that's been mapped out by the writers, and here's the actor coming into that stream. And so when I was working with Chris Hemsworth on Thor, when I was working with Tom Hiddleston on Loki, the focus of those moments was, how close can we get you to being a true conduit for what's the arc of this character? This character has an unworthiness and then a worthiness. This character has a journey from being immortal to mortal, you know, in terms of the arc of Thor's character on that film, you know, humility, pride, all of these different things. How can we identify each moment where you feel that signal super strong and can play with it until something is embodied?
I think this is a really interesting place to zoom in, because for listeners, you know, we might be I mean, any pathway of life, a mom or a plumber or a teacher, we all experience this concept of signal versus noise, distraction versus focus. But this is a really interesting place to kind of focus it, or for us to hear a bit more of your kind of lensing. Because so what's the actual situation? You're working on a Thor or a Loki type of movie, and you're a movement director, or you're working with this kind of actor on physical, everything from facial stuff to, it's like, what degree are you practicalizing this idea of a signal versus noise?
Yeah, like, I mean, I can give you a really practical kind of application, and then I'd love to kind of share, you know, a little bit of what you were just talking about in terms of generalizing it. So for Thor, you know, Kenneth Branagh came to me, the director of Thor, and said, you know, I need you to work with the Frost Giants. I successfully, you know, knocked that out of the park. I gave them stuff they didn't have. I really transformed. He was like, okay, I'd like you to move up the chain. Uh, we have our principal actor. He feels like a prince. We need him to be a god. Can you do that?
And so your title on call sheet is what?
At that time, it was acting coach,
Wow.
or movement coach,
Wow.
actually. And
So
then,
you begin a dialogue with Hemsworth on physical, that's the emphasis, physicality.
yes, on how to embody, you know, and I brought in all of these images and we worked out the combat. You know, we were just doing it like drills for a little bit. And then, you know, I had maybe 10 sessions with him over a month period. And about the second or third session, I started talking to him about what is the power of thunder. Thunder comes after lightning, it resounds. So everything that we're doing, all of the movement that we're doing is, you know, about this resounding off of the walls.
It's not really percussive. It's a less, it's expansive. It's a kind of the settling after the percussion.
Yes, and then it's also what arrives back.
Right.
So it's like when it goes out, it comes back. And so his, you know, the essence of what locked in for him, where he transformed, was he felt that movement where, as he was just doing these small gestures, he could feel it rippling out to the walls and coming back to him. And it changed his physicality. And it was just one tiny adjustment, you know, like the movement of one flower in a flower arrangement, or the turn of one like quick, tight little quick motion that like locks the plumbing into its shape, that you know, that's practice, that you do, you know, that a really practiced person at their job does each time in a precise and exact way, you know. And it's those
Wow.
kinds of signatures that live across humanity as the tricks that we learn, you know, that we master. Last thing I'll say, because I'd love your reflection on what I'm sharing,
Yeah, beautiful.
is there's a Martin Prechtel is a great Quechuan writer from South America. Can't recommend him enough to search him out on the internet and look him up. But one of the things that he writes about in one of his books is this idea that only families that learn a magic trick survive.
Wow.
Back in the day, when there wasn't so much support for survival, through all of the mechanisms of modern society, if you wanted to survive, you had to learn a magic trick. You had to learn something that no one else could do. That because you could do it, that little turn of the knob, that little, double strike on the bell, whatever it was, that there was something. Everyone was like, we got to keep that person around.
Right. Wait, what's his name again? Martin what?
Martin, Martin Prechtel, Prechtel, Prechtel. And there's an incredible piece by him, a recording called Grief and Praise, that I cannot highly recommend enough, to just immediately, after you're finished listening to us, tune to that. Grief and Praise, an interview with, or a speech by Martin Prechtel.
Powerful.
Yeah, but that magic trick, man, that signature move, that understanding of all of the details of nature and life and mind, and to be able to find that one little place where you can turn a key on it and it opens up for everyone.
Man, may I?
Please.
Man, so I'm listening to what was just said, and the yogi in me is like, oh, that's a kriya. That's a utility-based kriya. That, so I'm here on the ranch with Ted, and I could ask that guy anything, and there's these rhythms that just quick ways that it's like he's never not in some kind of orchestration. I was setting something up for his laptop today, and I'm like nearby tech assistant officially.
Right.
And he just said, I said something to him, but he wasn't responsive. And I look, and he's already kind of in. He's like, and he's already finding it. Picks up the guitar, kind of like, he's not mumbling words, but he's like whispering sound stuff to something, and he's getting it. And then he kind of just touches the neck of the guitar for a second, hands within 2 seconds. Woo! No, that's not it. And he starts doing the thing that you could tell he just heard it, but now he has to find it. And I was like, man, that's where I get that from. But also that's a kriya. He's in a kriya called Ted. So this is also where my work is, as a Siddha practitioner comes in, where I can see someone's being compressed by their trauma into an echoing feedback loop of an identity that, with the use of really pronouns of me and I, it's actually looping them in an echo chamber of reality where they can't see the source of the distortion. They are the distortion perpetuator. And so these series of mirrors and questions, and sometimes tactics and tactical experiences that I can provide, will just reflect the soul's presence back to itself. And there's that moment which I call visceral epiphany. And you have this, I'm not that. So I try to untie that. That's what my teacher described it. My teacher described it. Will Dupree to me as that one time. He's like, I'm just helping you untie the knot called you. And I was like, oh, but one last thing on that, it's like a teacher might have in a schoolroom, you might have something with a pen or something on a desk. And you said plumber, like that, the belt that he wears before he goes to, like these practical, tactical, and I think sensory based um, uh, yeah, attitudinally affecting things that we do with the actual body in rhythm and in time can act like a kriya and help us find this kind of magic thing that you're talking about. As the sorry.
Well, that's what I wanted to identify. First off, I'd really love some detail on what a kriya is, its
Yeah.
context, and what we're actually kind of unraveling here,
Yes.
because it in itself is a tool. Someone listening to this, was like, well, what is a kriya? What is that, and how can I use it? And the thing that I wanted to put up here as a polarity for you to think about and us to talk about is there's there's the gift that's given by being successful in a certain way, and then there's the kind of formulation around that success that becomes its own problem.
The noise.
And so I wanted to kind of tool out this, because I think for me this is about beginning to move towards the currency concept, that
Wow.
there's something of value that I created in the world that works for me and my family, but then it creates its own problem in a way. And how to balance these and find value between them, but also how to offer that value in the world and not take away from others and the value that they have in the world. Like there's just like this, it kind of came to me as a whole construct. I
Yeah.
think we can start with just, what is a kriya? Like, how would you describe a kriya in that context?
Yeah. In this context, I would describe a kriya as an action that you do with your mind and your body at the same time that alters the energy of your system. And system means emotion, mental, physical, but then physiological and neurological and biochemical. These are all kind of facets of physiological. So this, for instance, there's a kriya where you press your thumbs into your ears, your pointer fingers go over your eyes, you plug your nose, and you hold your breath, but you're pressing the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth as you're squeezing the perineum, which is basically what you cut off urine flow with, and which is its own lock. And it's that lock is called a bunda. Don't hurt yourself, whatever. Look great though. And so that bottom, that root, women are familiar with it potentially that aren't in a yogic lineage, that they just call it Kegel muscles, but it's basically your urinary tract muscle control. You have retention there. You squeeze that, bring that up towards the belly button, and that's a banda. A banda is a lock, and that lock basically prevents energy from leaking out there, which otherwise it could potentially, you could say that it's just circulating in what we would call the auric field, or even the auric field might sound spiritual, but it's a biomechanical aspect of the actual body. So a kriya is this practice that these dudes sat, in the mountains, and they realized the nature of things, and then they found ways to assist the nature of things and lessen their hindrance of the nature of things. So how's that for an articulation of kriya?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So again, like, to reiterate, what I'm hearing is that a kriya is a set of actions that you do with your body that bring you greater clarity, greater presence, greater circulation of certain flows within the body.
Which on the way to the greater circulation, you might actually have to hinder the circulation.
Right, right. And this is, so one of the things I'm thinking about is, like, in terms of social relationships. If someone says, "What do you think about that?" That's a kriya. It is a moment where I've just shared with you, and then I share with you that I'm interested in you. And that's one of those magic tricks that allows someone to enter the room. If I'm brilliant and I have so much to offer and so much to say, and I'm just over the top with how much value I have to offer in the universe, but I can't actually say to you, what do you think about what I'm sharing?
Sounds like someone I know.
you lose a great amount of the value that it has for the other person. It's super valuable for you because you get to express and you get to know what it is that you're sharing in the world. But do you know what its actually effect is? And this kind of cultural sensitivity and listening to the other is a skill set that can become hippie and, you know, too much. But if there's a beautiful balancing of sharing of your offering and then listening for the response.
I'm hearing also trauma, and what trauma causes. I look at it as an innie belly button and an outie belly button is the kind of predominant polarities that each soul takes. And that outie belly button is solar, the innie belly button is lunar. So someone might be really good at asking questions, might be good at reflecting or deflecting, but they might not have any real confidence in saying I'm brilliant and turning on that faucet of expressing. And so there's a couple of things happening here. There's one concept called the densities of consciousness. And then there's another concept called solar lunar. So within every density, there is solar and there's lunar. And you could also say that solar lunar is masculine and feminine. In masculine and feminine, I would say that each of the four primary elements are also towards masculine and feminine. And they can switch in polarity there as well. But someone that's, you know, kind of addicted to being solar doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but it might be a reflection of their trauma, kind of their trauma mixed with their astrology, push them into this identity composition. And that you could say that is a type of Kriya for source, for spirit. And now their belly button is kind of just always used to doing that. Now that exact same reflection exists on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like someone doesn't have any connection with speaking, even if they're given, you know, vivid interest. Hey, what do you think? I don't really. And
but
so
I think that these are the magic tricks, because it is like all of those things that you just referenced. There's massive bodies of information that have to be channeled and understood for them to make sense. And there are just these little trigger points or these little memory kind of, you know, keys where if you say something in the right way at the right time with someone, all of those worlds of big knowledge and understanding become very practical in an instant. And it's those kinds of magic tricks. And when I say magic tricks, I just mean things that are enacted that have tangible effect, that carry with them a massive amount of understanding that comes before. And I keep, you know, referencing it to the plumber that knows how to twist the metal at a certain curve so that the water flows easily and attach it in the right way, you know, or just unclog your toilet. You can't do it. You've been trying at it for hours and they just go, unclogged your toilet. You know what I mean? Like it's a precision, but it's practical. So that
that practicality gives it value.
Yes.
And
yes, because all of that information, all of the information about what a Kriya is and all of its context and all of its history and all of the ways in which it could be valuable to you is only valuable to you when it actually is in that moment of the key being turned.
Yes. Otherwise, it's noise.
Otherwise, it's noise. It's not valuable. It doesn't have any context. You know, so all of the astrological conjunctions of the universe mean nothing without that moment where you go, oh my God, I'm standing here right now and I have a decision to make. And this person is saying something to me that helps me to see all of the previous decisions and how I have this decision to make right now. And if I make the right decision, or if I make a decision, that this could change my life. And when you see it in the context of acting, it's always really important to like see this bigger thing, because scripts are written to show and illustrate great transitions of lives. things that happen that change them forever, a combat, a trauma, a moment of change and transformation. That's what a writer is doing. They're scripting these very minute moments of transition where you can see big things happen out of small moments. And if you're coaching someone to become open to that moment, and then they actually go, I feel it, I understand, and then you see them do the lines that they just did in curiosity but not certainty, and they do it in a way that, like, oh my God, you just unveiled this experience, and everyone who sees you do this will understand. That's the same moment in a person's life where you give them an opportunity to see how the trauma has been affecting them for the entirety of their lives. And you give them that choice to make a new perspective on it, to make a new choice when that choice, when that consistent reminder of how they are or how they've seen themselves comes up. You have a choice. You have a choice.
I sense this is a great transition towards currency, because in this work that I've been engaging in recently, we talk about my team and I, we talk about, currency really is the current sea, and the sea level is, this word kind of etymology connection between currency, money, mani pura, the yellow chakra, third ray, and this sense of solar plexus, the identity, but the currency, the river, the flow of that energy source flowing. But also something that's paradoxical that we just kind of pointed at, which is like, I could talk to, Ted and maybe his hunting buddies about a Kriya, and I would be so uncomfortable within seconds of bringing it up, because I could feel, and this has happened only enough times as I needed it to happen, where it's like, don't talk about those things with those people. Got it. It's a reflection. It's a reflection that that's not needed. That's not relevant. That's not helpful. If I continued, I'd actually be disjointed. It's not in context. Ready for the bagpipe solo? Oh man, I forgot this was a funeral. Sorry. It's disconnected. It's not in harmony. It's not in unison. So the value, maybe if I'm in the middle of the 90s on the set of Braveheart, man, that bagpipe's got value, and it's got a very specific prescribed high value currency there. Same thing with these magic tricks. These magic tricks are, now stay with me there, I think this is the story of Christ that becomes the story of autism. I have a very vivid, I think it's one of my life work's primary notes of understanding how Christ, as a soul, the soul self, the Atma, the yogic word for soul self is Atma. I understand that the word Christ really means Christos, and the crystalline self is the Christed self. The Christed self is the high soul self. The yogic word for that is Jiva Atma or Paramatma. So the Atma is the Christ that you are, I am, the mutual indwelling that this soul awareness is. We can get esoteric, but we don't need to. But Christ becomes an autistic person at some point, and how that interrupts normalcy is something that I'm very interested in as almost like a beautiful reflection, and it's perfect. But right now, and where we're at in society, it's deeply misunderstood. And so this gift can be seen as broken. Someone's magic trick can be seen as wrong. Someone's thing that's valuable, it's this old colloquialism, one man's trash is another man's treasure. It kind of shows up in all these different moments. What are you seeing with that? Because that
translation, it's translation. The currency of an Indonesian rupiah to the dollar is 14,000 rupiah to $1. So the value of money and action here is not as valuable as the actions of an American action, right? So that's a translation of value. If you want to talk spiritual aesthetics to a group of people that are entirely practical, there is a way to translate it to the trigger and the moment of shooting that elk that can be a moment of revelation for them.
Translation.
The context of this hunting is that there's a mindset of communion with the animal. There's a mindset of being in that right exact pocket of, and the question is, can you draw out the correlation to include their family history, their father's perspective, the way in which they got the discipline in the first place, like any of a million avenues on that one moment that is a relatable moment. If we're talking about the doctrine of Christ as it relates to the individual neurodiversity of each person and how they are each separate in their way of perceiving, but contain that one singular spark that is out of alignment with any other truth, but is the true alignment with God. That is the autistic signature. That person's really connected to what they're doing, but they don't make sense to anyone else. So it's the currency is the translation of value from some place where there's 14,000 to 1, and then the 1. How do you equalize value so that you're actually generating an ongoing sense of continuity of not just value in terms of currency and money, but meaning and communication of, see, this is valuable because this buys you a yacht, or this buys you, power, or this buys you something that's relatable. And then you can begin to shift the value. Right? The last thing I'll say about this is, like, in the NFT world, I don't know any of the minutia. I don't really get any of the details. But what I know is that things become validated first in this way. Someone spent $1 billion on it. Someone spent $1 million. And everyone's like, oh my God, someone spent $1 million on it. It must be valuable.
I'm listening now.
Yeah. And you get enough of those. Someone made 10 of these things, they're $400,000 a piece. What are they? Well, it doesn't really matter. What it translates to is someone cared enough to spend 400 grand 10 times on this thing, and it becomes valid, and it validates the blockchain. And the blockchain is now, because of this validation, an open frame for people to generate value within it. Now, it could just end up being a money laundering thing for terrible, terrible forces. Black market forces could be terrible. It could do terrible things for money. We don't know. We don't know. But it could also do incredible things in terms of, DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, that utilize the blockchain to be able to say, we don't spend money on anything that damages the environment. And anyone who spends money in this distributed organization, which could be as large as a nation and small as a household, will not spend money on anything that has been identified as causing damage to people, places, or resources. Mm-hmm. And so there's ways that money can be generated that the blockchain validates. But the first entry point is this translation of the NFT, right? So all of this to say that, the autistic moment of something that doesn't fit in, but is trying so hard to be itself experiencing life, and then being able to show the value of that to others, is this point of currency generation. How do you say to your father and his hunting buddies, I really want to communicate to you the value of a kriya and trauma?
Or how do you communicate to 90% of baby boomers? I want to communicate to you the value of an NFT.
Right.
But the answer to both is translation.
Translation.
I feel this nudge to invite you to illuminate an aspect of, I mean, you're in Bali right now. You're an American human man creature, and you've been led to this value in living in another place. What do you have to maybe point at, or what has most occupied your attention in terms of value in shift? I mean, you had to see some value to shift to actually living at this other place. What was that?
Well, when I was 20, I decided that I was going to pursue my deep desire to understand the way in which other cultures translated performance. I had been a performer for 6 years. I had done theater. I had investigated dance and some aspects of circus and big spectacle. And I saw some performance in images and in film that said Bali is where you need to go.
You saw footage of the monkey dance, monkey chant.
Yes, I saw footage of Hanuman dancing as part of some larger performance, which ended up being the Ketchak, the Balinese monkey chant that is done, was done during tourist times avidly in Uluwatu, southern Bali, and Ubud, central Bali, and comes out of a very, very old tradition of an exorcistic ritual to purge a village of darkness, evil spirits, bad thoughts, negative connotations. And that signature magic trick that I witnessed as a singular image drew me to come here. And that was when I was 20, before a large amount of commercialism occurred here, when it was still, believe it or not, even in the 90s, it was still dirt roads, no like very rare electricity, very much village life. And I still to this day, every time I walk out and talk to people in the streets and I mention the teacher that I studied with, the time that I was here, the things that I did, they're just like, wow, you were here when it was different Bali. Yeah. And because of that, it changed me. And the way in which I was taught changed me. The approach of my teacher, Pak Tutor, when I first came here, was very dismissive, very funny, very like, you're a frog, you'll never get it. But then at the very end, he put me right in the center of the Ketchak dance where I wanted to be, where he understood that I came there for this. And he made me pay every day, laughing at me, laughing with me, but then he put me right in the center of the Ketchak dance for 4 or 5 hours, where I got to do exactly what I came there for 2 days before I left. The understanding of time is different here. The understanding of cycles of human behavior is different here. The understanding that everyone is a part of something that they're doing on a consistent basis, that it's based around time signatures of 3-day, 5-day, 7-day, 13-day, 20-day, 60-day cycles, and that they're all interacting like breath and pulse and the cycles of the neurological system, and that there's this massive calendar that's linking all of it, and that's what they're doing when they're celebrating and making their daily offerings. It is an integrated religious practice that is essentially cultural unification with natural processes on a daily basis. And when you look at the art that they make and you see 20 people doing rhythms that are interlocking, that where any individual, any individual one of these gongs or bells sounds beautiful on its own, but you create this synthesis, a massive fugue of interacting, polyrhythms that like each have their own clarity and yet signature this massive symphony. You see that it's not just they make a nice calendar and they make nice music. It's one integrated thing that we had lost, and people feel it in these different moments when you're out in your hunting group, let's say, with Ted, he's out there with his hunting group and they're looking at nature itself and ending a life in total reverence. And so for them, they feel it at that moment and they get it. And they're like, this has usefulness. This has utility. This does this, and maybe even that plumber feels it when they walk up and they go, and they open the doorway, or a mother when she reaches her kid and they stop crying, where everyone gets some aspect of it. But this is a society that's structured to do it consistently, not every day. I mean, they make offerings every day, but they, this idea of us all being together, all making this music, all being there and showing up for it. It's different than watching the latest Marvel movie at the cinema.
I hear you do it effortlessly, and I've learned from you as you do it that you are integral. You have a way of saying, this is why I moved to Bali, America, but a Bali, and even it's integral, but even 10, 100, but I don't know how much they are in that moment, but you painted it in a way that makes it look nice. But my question to you is, because we have to at least admit that not everyone is functioning in this integral framework, that this non-integral framework is causing people to look at other people as you're lower than I am, or other, and probably a lot in America, you are higher than I am, and I envy that, or whatever it is. It's a judgmental self-comparison flash of a moment that puts person A's ego and person B's ego at different plateaus, at different bandwidths. And yet something that you just displayed in your mentioning of these different contexts of living, you were able to point at it, but then neuralize, or rather neutralize your own pointing at it and saying there's still something divine there. Look at it, point at it, neutralize it. There's still something divine there, but you're in Bali. You're not in Texas.
Right.
But let me cap it. Let me cap it. What is that? What is the faculty that causes, because I was in Bali for 21 days and it changed my life, and it was with you, and I met a Ketchak master that changed my life, and that entire experience changed my framework and integrated me into something very practical, which for me takes place in my most immediate faculty, my mind, body, spirit complex, my situation, my psychology, my experience with spirituality, mystic experiences, whatever you want to call it. But coming back here to Texas and coming to America, and you're not in America right now, what is that? But I'm sure it happens over there too. What is that faculty, if you had to put words to it, which I'm asking you to, what is that faculty that we're pointing at that doesn't translate? Because this is now how it connects back to currency, that says NFTs are bad, it's a waste of time, the internet is taking our souls, and Web3 is evil. What is that part of us as a collective that doesn't get it?
Okay, so I watched the entirety of the podcast where Ted and Joe were talking.
Please.
And when I'm watching Ted Nugent speak, there is a level of authority that he speaks from, where he's able to call other people idiots.
Man.
And in that, there's a disrespect, and there's exactly that. I'm tuning myself up and tuning someone else down.
Man.
This kind of element is a kind of revenge of the repressed. because over time, the technological, we are intellectual, and we're going to show you how our society is better because it considers all the low people and brings everybody up together, and how that has failed. Neoliberalism has failed. There's a certain level of the everyday, hunter that Ted represents being saying, see, fuck you. See, it didn't work. It's not good. It's not sound. What you're proposing was not good. Your end to oppression just generated more oppression. Like now you guys are trying to oppress us and we're kicking back. And there, all of these back and forth roil and toiling of like the mad, raging sea storms in the center of our culture.
Of duality.
That duality and the proving of oneself as correct over someone else. And that element, and being able to say, actually, there's an integrative mentality that says your point of view is valid, valuable, important to me. I care about your perspective. I believe that you understand something fundamentally beautiful about the universe when you shoot that deer and provide its flesh to people who are hungry. And that in your justification for everything else that you do, there is something very powerful that I know you align with, that is true for you, that is also elementally and fundamentally true. Also, included in the vast mosaic of life and how it operates, these people who are otherwise focused on things that they would like to be able to be more healthy, like being able to do tempeh and tofu in a way that isn't ecologically degradative, but haven't yet figured it out, want to understand what you have, and we want to work together to create a better currency and value set for all involved, so it doesn't become about, I have more money than you, I have a more beautiful wife than you, I have a more successful situation than you, so fuck you for not being able to fit into my worldview. You're wrong.
Because I feel like that's just the same archetype of what happens on playgrounds. And now those folks grew up, and these have, or those don't have. And then even the don't, it's middle fingers back and forth for whatever reason that it is. It's justification as to right and wrong for whatever reason that it is. It's Sadhguru talks about it as like inclusive versus exclusive. And I mean, just on a conversational level, I've grown up around this guy since I came here in this suit, and man, those kind of moments, for me, it's like, man, I get it. If that was the only version of a conservative that I ever heard in that kind of flash bullet point of a moment, I would be like, man, fuck all that shit too. And fuck all those white people that are like that. And fuck all the conservative red hat wearing people that are like that. Because that's kind of the same wound, knife, trauma, something went in, something got hurt. Something said I did it, something said it did it to me. And it's this wound in our collective that it's like, I don't know, because of the internet potentially, it's like now we're more zoomed in on the wound itself. There's missions coming out of both sides of the wound, and they just keep pointing at each other. And there's a handful of like disruptors to that conversation that I think are bringing philosophical, spiritual based context to understanding how these traumas are actually spiritual tribal trauma complexes that are magnetically warping reality towards itself into some type of a moment of, or whatever that releases.
And I really want to hear from you what you feel is out there in culture that is integrative, because we've got massive amounts of cancel culture pushback. We've got Black Lives Matter, all lives, blue lives, like there's so many deep conversations going on. And as an observer, and a participant, and specifically as a white person, trying to integrate these oppressions and then the history of this intellectual legacy that says that everything is power dynamics and oppression in systematic destruction of specific peoples, all of this construct. What is it that is signal for you amidst all of this language, amidst all of this trauma being expressed? Where do you see a thread that can be pulled on, and without snapping it, that can be pulled on, that can help to unravel all of this mess?
Siddha. If there were more individuals that became self-realized, and you could take a yogic pathway or a different pathway, but the word siddha, from my context, the word siddha basically means perfect sight. So it's actually the attempt to use your subjectiveness to kind of resolve your subjectiveness's ability to warp your objectivity. Meaning, I have a person that I'm looking into this world through. When I see something clear exactly as it is, my person is a clear lens that I'm seeing through. My lens is not affecting me. I'm able to see it clearly. This has not affected me. This is actually transparent. I mentioned it yesterday, a few days ago, to my beloved. I said, my body feels great today. It was invisible. She's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, because it didn't show up. I didn't feel soreness anywhere. I did my practice, but like, even in my practice, I didn't like lean in too hard. And I finished my practice, and I drank coffee. I pooped. I ate food. I didn't get a stomach ache. I didn't bite my lip. Like, my body didn't ruin or interrupt any of my experiences that I needed the body for. So what I see is happening in society is that there are a predominant, so this is literally an essay, and it's like a big chapter of the book that I've been working on for a minute, called Moon Theory. And the essay is called Tribalism is the ceiling to third density. And tribalism is like, this is the ceiling, and third density is like this pocket of consciousness. And without going into all these terms and stuff, it basically means hyper-identified souls with their physical makeup. Sure. So we're all souls, and some are hyper-identified with their physical makeup, whether it's because of economic situation or racial situation or cultural situation. It is what it is. That's actually one of the flying flags of Siddha. It is what it is. As I've come to work with different people in trauma, I actually don't care how you see me, because it is what it is. And if I'm here and I'm meant to be of assistance to you, then it's important that you see me however you see me. But now I'm actually seeing how you see me, and that's helping me see how you see yourself. It is what it is. It is what it is. If it is, then it must be here for a reason. If it is, then why is it? That's the place that I approach it from my Sifu, my teacher, my lineage that I come from, as this. It's a desire to be of assistance, because I just pulled up into town. Both my legs work, both my arms work. I seem to be fit. I seem to be able to speak. I'm not in pain. And damn, there's a dude with no leg. That lady's bleeding. That dog is biting the kid right now. Dude with no legs gonna have to wait. I'm gonna throw my towel at this lady, because right now the dog and the eating the kid is the most important thing. So I'm going to now start by neutralizing that situation. So really, that's my attempt at moving into any of this, is like, okay, this is really noisy. That's really noisy. How can I 0 point? And I would say that, man, every of these major, well, that's enough of that. But I'd say someone like, and I'd say like intentionally, someone like Jordan Peterson is, to me, what this conversation can move forward with. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, it's just another white guy. And you know what? Thomas Sowell, I think it is, Dr. Thomas Sowell. and Jordan Peterson are two of my favorite lenses in neutralizing. Thomas Sowell is an African lineage man that I don't know if he identifies as conservative, but most of the things that I see him say, they're quite counter. They're quite opposite as to what you'd think that someone like him would say. There's I'm sure there's plenty other people out there in the world, and I'd love to hear your lens of what it looks like to move forward and what you feel like is that 0 point threat. But I sense that there's a lot of an attempt to fix the world without fixing the self, without fixing the inner working. It's like moving into the situation, being like, I'm here to fix the house. Here's my hammer. I'm ready to go, guys. And you're like, bro, you're bleeding from your esophagus. Your blood is dripping on the 2x4, and your hammer is made out of crayons, and it's not as effective as you think that it is. There's a lot of that in the culture, and maybe that's a bit more cartoonish than actually real.
That's great. That's fun.
But I mean, whether it's, and man, so Joe Rogan. So this is the second time that I've met him, and I mean, look, if you're on this podcast and you don't know who my dad is, check it out. But yeah, this guy, Ted, what an interesting figure. So much clarity and so much intelligence and so much spirituality and so much truth, logic, common sense that he's honestly always mentioning. And yet so much of the delivery of it is so harsh, and it is so unhelpful. And I, as an offspring of his, have attempted to tell him how unhelpful that delivery of the insight is. But even I was watching Joe Rogan, and I think him, like several other people, it's almost like their mission, it's not even about the things. It's like neutralizing the width of the things to make it not just condensed and compressed for that sake of compression, but like something I witnessed him do with Ted, and I've seen him do it in other podcasts, talking about Joe Rogan, as like, he's also a martial artist and he's a comedian. And then he like hosts UFC events of like the most deadliest warriors on planet Earth, like fighting each other in front of cameras and people. And so this guy's a very interesting karmic situation. But yeah, I watched him time and time, several times, at least there at that time with Ted recently, November 2021. He gives an opportunity for that person to reveal their level of self-awareness without any kind of teaching, without any kind of coaching. And then if he even pressed on the gas a couple times, because Joe, Ted says something like, Ted loves to just rant about how evil Nancy Pelosi is. And Joe was like, well, why, if you are Ted and Ted is saying these people are just terrible people, Joe was like, but why? If that's the case, let's talk about why, because that would be like a movement towards understanding. And Ted, violently proclaimed, potentially with a guitar in his hand at the same time, there is no understanding. There's no point in why. Don't ask why, Joe. And he said this to me. Yeah. And I was like, man, I to this day have these moments with him where he's just like, there's no reason. And to me, that's where his ceiling is that there is no, and mind you, he's an avatar that is so representative of many people.
Obviously, otherwise he wouldn't even get anywhere near the Joe Rogan show.
Right.
If Joe Rogan did not see him as like principally valuable,
avataric
audience.
Yeah.
He basically, he's had Ted on how many times?
This is the second time.
So, it's like he's basically saying, hey guys, I know what you are and I know what you need, my audience. And what you need right now is some Ted Nugent, because you need to see who he is through my lens. Like he doesn't bring anybody on there unless he's like, this is relevant, this is important right now, and there's some kind of victory that's happening for the hunter. There's some kind of victory that's happening for the conservative. There's some kind of victory that's happening, in terms of the incalcitrant, I will not move from this position. There is no why. There's just, that's wrong, this is right.
Right, but then he has Paul Stamets on. He had Snoop Dogg on the week before Ted was on. He's had Richard Doblin, Tim Doblin, something Doblin, the guy who's founded Maps. You know, Joe Rogan's very interested in. So all those listening, I sent dear brother Mirror Paradox the episode of Ted and Joe talking, and he's like, "Where do you want me to zoom in?" And I'm like, "I'm not sure. It's really the whole
Just
thing.
watch the
It's
whole
just
thing.
like I don't know what to tell you right now." And all that I got in response was a Terence McKenna video. And I couldn't have smiled deeper in my soul because I mean, I've been prophetizing as best I can to these I don't even think Ted would call himself a Christian, which by the way, I want to mention before we get off here. I don't know what your time is like, but there's this dogmatic tribal Christian complex that has been confronting me, literally coming to me, and it's been very weird. But sidebar, I wouldn't say that Ted. I don't think Ted would call himself a Christian. I think he just call himself a soul, a spiritual person. But Terence McKenna speaks about plants and the usage of plants in such a beautiful, poetic, conscious, logical, tactile, relevant, useful. Talk about value based on use. You know, the world is eating ourselves alive, and these plants are talking to us and trying to get. You know, he's a humorist while he's also a pragmatist.
Yeah.
And I mean, in 2016, I started. I would walk around the streets of it was my first time I went to New York actually, and I had some psilocybin and some DMT and two ayahuasca experiences. No, I only had one ayahuasca experience under my belt at that time. And so I'm walking through NYC, just earpods, and Terence McKenna just flowing through my awareness. And he's pointing at trauma complexes, but he's pointing at social economic complexes. He's pointing at like almost as in tears. By the way, there's this aesthetic in Bali. I'm almost done to hand the baton back, by the way. There's this aesthetic in Bali where it's like the step down fields. You know what I'm talking about? Is there a name for those? They're like fields on the side of a mountain, but they like level out almost as steps. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there it's basically tiered rice fields.
Terence,
Um,
Terence McKenna did that to my mind. And he was like showing that there's these, it's not just chaos. Jordan Peterson's helpful like that too. It's not just chaos. There, trust me, there's chaos, but there is rational, logical processes that assist. And it's part of nature actually to integrate that. So, I mean, yeah, what in all of that? Yeah, let me ask that. What, you know, you're my brother. I don't know what to you, but I'm some kind of a younger version of yourself in some respects. And I send you this video. My dad's talking to Joe Rogan, just in moments a beautiful poet and a savant, and then other moments just an Igor like um, caveman ranting. And then you send me a Terence McKenna video. Tell me about that.
well, I mean, I think where I'm coming from is that there's a dominator story. There's no doubt that the dominator story won out over the plateau of however many 40,000 years it was, where humanity was basically, as Terence McKenna kind of postulates, sitting pretty after the dying off of the Arborian jungle into the plains, that the cattle and the poop and the mushroom became a clarifying augmented food source, where proto-humans sought out different food sources because their old food sources were dying, and they came upon this sort of semi-food source which gave them greater physical visual clarity and turned them on sexually. So all of their ancestors became more prolific in terms of sexual copulation and generation of, and also more successful hunters. So for a period of time, there was this massive orgiastic, encouraged glossalia into language over 40,000 years that became what humanity's culture was. And then there was a dominator culture that grew out of that, that became the kings and queens that, that identified this is ours. Everything that you guys created in terms of language, beauty of the details of interaction with nature and culture and agriculture and all these things.
Which real quick, this is basically stoned ape theory, right?
Yeah, this is Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory.
Monkeys ate psilocybin, psychedelic mushrooms, and woke up into what we understand as kind of modern hominids.
And then at a certain point, the dominator culture that was proto-chimpanzee, essentially before that, reasserted itself in the form of, city-states and kings and queens and the military commandeered by, like, all of this is to say, I'm just sharing all of this because I want to accelerate this mentality, all of this to equal Ted Nugent consciousness. And Ted Nugent consciousness is there's victory and there's defeat. And victory is anything that gets everyone fed and like measurably their lives improved. And, people get to be sovereign, maintain their own selves over everything else. Freedom and the construct that I want to kind of tool out is that liberty and freedom are in constant balance. Liberty means I get to do with my land what I want, but I also get to encourage other people's liberty because they have freedom. And if their freedom means they come onto my land, I have to have a dialogue with them about liberty. This is my land. That's not your land. These are my elk, not your elk. These elk are going to do this to the environment. Like any of those details come out of a conversation between what freedom and liberty are. And so what I'm trying to do is say, I heard your father clear, which is, I'm sovereign. You are sovereign too. Anyone who tries to take away your sovereignty is the enemy. And anyone who tries to stop those people from having sovereignty in any of these contexts are idiots and need to be pushed down as far as possible so that the smart people can rise up. And I said, okay, like I hear you loud and clear. I hear what your value sets are and what you're trying to communicate, which is my liberty counts. What I do with my guns, what I do with my land, what I do with the animals and the intelligence that I can offer in terms of the helicopter killing of pigs in a place where they are eating other people's livelihoods in the agricultural world. And I've figured out what's smart. Great. Like, thank you for your intelligence.
Great job.
Now, let's find a way to all communicate these value sets in a way that augments all of the needs, not just your sovereign need to be right in your context. Texas is a singular context. It's different than Africa. It's different than Indonesia. It's different than, the neighboring states, and there is a unifying principle that was expressed in Terence's work that was about unifying these fields. And I can't remember exactly what it was that like triggered me to send you it, but it was something about the equalization of the value sets. And I was kind of acknowledging what your father was saying as a really important part of the whole, but it's not integrated. It's very much, I am on this mountaintop with this gun and this helicopter, and I know that if you come anywhere near this mountain and I don't agree with you, I'm going to shoot you down. It's not, I'm on this helicopter on this mountain to provide for everyone, which includes trying to understand where you're at from your mountaintop as well.
Yeah. What's it called where that integrates and evolves and is inclusive and yet extremely rationally logical. I
Simwa
mean,
Warna. Like
you said,
Simwa means
you
all.
said what?
Simwa Warna means all colors.
Someone
Simwa
wanted.
Warna is Indonesian. And it's this idea that you're coming from orange and these people are coming from green, and there is turquoise and violet and indigo, and that each one of these is a progression, and to come from the red and move slowly towards the green is to be, our world, our view is best. Wait, there's a better view. The world view is best. Wait, there's a better view. Like that humanity evolved over time through a bandwidth of colors,
Yes.
and that we're at a stage where we can now integrate all of it. And, I'm just calling it Semua Warna because it's in Indonesian and I can say it. It's all colors. And it's this idea that there is a spectrum of understanding that's unified in the prismatic singularity of all of those colors being valuable.
Yes. Yeah.
Please.
To me, this is what Ken Wilber's work points at. This is what Terence McKenna's work points at. This is what true, call it like social philosophical yogic theory points at. And there's I don't want to bastardize it. I don't know if it's like a Lakota term or if it's just an indigenous American term that comes from a particular place. Forgive me for not knowing exactly, but it's the idea of this rainbow prophecy. And it's this idea also, although I see that it's become extremely Romanized, and in Romanized, it's got raped, and raped got lessened in its actual meaning and value, but it's actually a bioluminescent term, and it means the second coming. And it's the second iteration of evolved crystal consciousness as hominids. It's also called the Age of Aquarius. It's been called the end of Kali Yuga. It's been called the New Earth. I mean, Eckhart Tolle's book, The New Earth, is freaking about what we're freaking talking about.
Yeah.
Basically.
And the Trump and the Post-Truth World is a book that Ken Wilber wrote. That's very, very good. Just when Trump got into office, which was basically this massive critique of kind of neoliberalism, but also of, kind of ethnocentric. It was his attempt to build that Samwa Warna perspective, where
Wilbur.
he's highly critical. It's called Trump and the Post-Truth. Hold on, Trump and the
by Ken Wilber.
Yeah.
Wow.
Trump and the Post-Truth World by Ken Wilber. Very short book. Very short book. But really, really describes very well the process of how we got here and why we're here. And it is that integral thing of, we have to include the voices we don't agree with. And it runs into a lot of paradoxical statements of, if this is true for you and this is contradicting it and true for me, there is somewhere in the middle that we can meet that integrates these truths. And by doing so, we're creating an opportunity for so many people that we are not yet considering.
So I got to harmonize this in a framework that for me it's the most digestible framework possible, because we've all seen its logos, and its logos is the rainbow. The rainbow is the full color spectrum in 7 breakdown colors. And it happens to parallel exactly a concept that does come from a particular place called yoga, or at least this kind of Sanskrit way of looking at the nature of the actual body. It's not an idea called the chakras, but there's this red one at the root of the spine. There's this orange one just below the belly button. There's this yellow one that's around the solar plexus. The green one is the heart. The blue one is the throat. This turquoise, this indigo one is just above the eyebrows, and this violet kind of almost maroonish one is above the sahasrara and the crown. And so when I'm looking at the growth of any soul that I'm interfacing with, it's not even like I have to attempt to do it. It's because I've become so interested in my own clarity and in my own, call it sovereignty, in my own biomechanical, psychological functioning pleasantness, really about my own wellness. I notice which ray is predominant for any person, which of their chakras is functioning as their driving engine. And society itself can be looked at like that as well, and groups can be, and groups of thought can be as well. So this I forgot, there's an actual book that talks about it. This yogi, forgot the name of all of it though, but it talks about this. We're actually in this midst of this shift into the fourth ray, into the green ray, into this heart coherence of being able to boom understand whoever I'm with, not with words, not with intellect, but with something that is beyond that, which seems to be the whole message of Jesus, which is a being in the heart, literally living in this heart space. But this yellow ray, what's right below the heart, is this yellow, and the yellow is all about my individuated, specific identity as it arrives in the group, which is called society, which is also why Terence's work is super refined and not. I mean, he does go on long tangents, but it's he looks at it as like, well, it's not for no huh?
But they're fun tangents.
They are. He's quite the, drunken boxer poet guy. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's like, it's, to me, it's like, that's where, I don't know, it's just some of my conversations with Ted just all right, well, I tried, but it's like, well, why the why is the fun part. The why is, in anytime I'm working with someone and it's like, oh man, this trauma happened to me when I was a kid, man, fuck. And it gets to this point where they really come to the grips with it. All of us, if you really want to do trauma work, call it shadow work. If you really want self-realization, we're all, as a person, you got to get to that moment where your worst thing, you got to say why. And the why always is because you had to become this. And this was this compression moment. This contraction, it was the moment where you broke into this shattered, fragmented poetry, not just brokenness for no reason. It's not broken for no reason. And it's shattered actually as the chakras are a shattering of one unadulterated white light. And then it moves into a prism and it shatters beautifully. And it's perfect part of how light operates. Light moves through this situation and then it undulates, it arpeggiates, it articulates into these fractals. So understanding these fractals is just as it's so incredibly as important. And I think that's what's the integration part, is understanding the key components is the missing thing in understanding the whole and the holographic. The holographic dimension that we're in can't be understood by a perspective that's in the holographic dimension. It has to be understood by a framework that sees the holographic dimension as being looked into. And this is where self-realization and clarification, I keep calling it self-clarification.
And let's identify that, like, one of the things that we do not have in our society, or in any society that I can identify, is a place where not you are now accountable to the laws that have been put in place, which is what courts are and prisons are, but what is actually making sense right now in our current court of appeals. Like, what are the voices that are out there right now that are to be considered? When you look at congressional conversation, it's really about people having specific agendas, either supporting or dismissing those agendas. It's not about a point of, let's investigate how to integrate the rage of the dispossessed middle class that once upon a time had factory jobs that have gone the way of rust and a slow motion explosion that has slowly disappeared. How do we integrate that rage? integrate that dispossession? You know, how do we integrate where we're headed? You know, with automation and robotization of the majority of menial workers. And is there, you know, what are the evolving conversations, and where's the place to have that conversation? You know, besides like long form podcasts, I would say that there's not a lot of places that we're having this kind of conversation.
I see something like this in the same way that we both understand a company like Maps, and there's others like this, which are, you could call it a positive institutionalization of something that has been dismissed and also demonized, which is psychedelics, but for the use of therapy. So imagine some kind of integration of this style of communication and elaboration for the sake of clarity, in the same way that we're moving towards this, heightened education of how psychedelics can improve the way that any psychological system works and functions. I mean, any person's mind and state is functioning. So it's like, I think there is something like
maybe for those people that, you know, are like, because again, Terence would say, you know, very rarely does a yoga mat practitioner step on their yoga mat with trembling knees, not knowing whether they're going to come out alive or not because of the possibility of death by astonishment, you know, that psychedelics represent. You know, there is this, you know, there are approaches to this kind of collective integration, you know, that for me, like the Ketchak Council, just to get back to this Balinese reason I'm here, is that when I came to the Ketchak, and, you know, the Ketchak is this interlocking, you know, concentric rings of people all speaking at once in the cadence of cooperative, overlapping, interlocking rhythms, you know, that after that feeling of I've been speaking constantly right next to this person who's been speaking the same thing but different than what they've been speaking over there, in this non-verbal, but I mean in this non-syntax, non-meaning based way, that when you then come back to language, there's I've already been heard. I don't need to speak and be heard because I've already been heard. My voice is already a part of the chorus. And
I hear you.
so
I hear you pointing at that we've lost our sense of primal tribalism, so we're like stuck in this psychological tribalism.
yes, and it's that primal tribalism that actually brings forth the true wisdom of, is this going to be valuable to me and my family? Is this truly going to benefit my community, my family, my individual body? And that there are other tools besides psychedelics, because all of the psychedelics are essentially already in our physiology. That's the purpose of ritual. That's the purpose of specifically organizing time for end results, like what courts and laws and Congress and what those things were in, you know, before we had the 13 colonies. Ben Franklin saw the form of the Lakota gatherings, where different tribes were able to come together and have these congresses, these councils, where they worked together to find mutual aid and mutual benefit. And the one thing that we cut out that they had in was the 13 grandmothers. That was an additional element of the Congress, the body of law, and the body of, you know, and the House of Representatives. There were 3 bodies that we translated, but there were originally 4 in these Lakota gatherings. I can't remember what it was called, like the White Congress or the White something. It was basically like where all of them would come together, all of the tribes would come together and have these grand meetings. Ben Franklin was there, being able to see this and see how it organized. He was able to speak with the elders and learn its structure, so that he was able to get that and translate that to the founding fathers to represent a higher level of democracy than had been achieved anywhere else. You know, but it left out the grandmothers, it left out the wisdom keepers of the older women that said, actually, is this valuable to our community? Is this going to actually benefit our children and the women of our culture? That was kept out, right? So,
Man,
all this to say, psychedelics are powerful. They hold a very specific purpose, and I think it's for shaman. And that means those people who are willing to take the responsibility of the vision for the majority of people. But I don't think it's central to the Congress of everyday life. I think that there's contradistinction, and maybe at festivals where everyone can do anything and everything is permissible, and there are guideposts and guardians to be able to allow these things to happen. You know what I mean? Like then sure, everyone can play. You know,
maybe.
maybe. But I think that, psychedelics are not for everyday life. They're for specific journeys to bring back information so that you bring it into the realm of society,
Totally.
and restructure the rituals that are everyday rituals that help people to get along, be heard, hear each other, and make decisions collectively that are for the greatest benefit of all, as well as the individual. So I
Thousand.
had to break that down and put that out, because I think, we have a tendency to look at this, this like, I've actualized my Atman in this crucial, beautiful psychedelic moment, but then where do we put it in terms of actual application?
And that's where activism comes in, and that's where making actual change show up in the waking state. It's like, oh cool, good job, you made it through the trip, well, welcome back, what are you going to do
Yeah,
now?
yeah,
And which is why I said maybe, because I mean, if anybody's asking me for like advice about psychedelics, I'm like, don't start at a festival. That's for at least for my context, this is a sacred thing that maybe you and a guide should, like, you should learn about how it affects you by yourself or with a guide. I mean, probably not by yourself if you're a first timer, but with a guide. It's a sacred ceremony. It's a ritual situation. It's not a party. That's, I think, where you get parted with fragments of self and stuff. But this whole idea of, and I think specifically, it's like the psilocybin and these other kind of ingredients are from Mama Earth, and that's how we integrate them into our biochemistry. But then our social chemistry, our collective chemistry needs to get integrated by something, and that's not from like a big ass peyote pipe. That's from, I think there's this missing piece of some kind of terrestrial consciousness. And I think that's why psychedelics make people feel a little uneasy, because it doesn't feel terrestrial. It doesn't feel utilitarian. It feels a bit more vacational, potentially, or vocational. I'm not sure. But there's something with this grandmother, I mean, literally elderly women talking about what works and what doesn't work with elderly men. And that is some kind of like, y'all have been on earth in these bodies. Y'all should at least be present while these middle-aged people are talking about, because maybe they're the sharpest in their wit and belief, and seeing what really could be pushed, and then seeing what's dangerous about that too much pushing. But this kind of checks and balances also from generationally. I mean, kids don't need to be there, I don't think so, but this kind of grandmother council frequency that I've heard about indigenous cultures having, I see that as definitely lacking. And I think that's also where some people get really turned off with the whole, oh, capitalism is evil, because capitalism is a reflection of the patriarchy, and the patriarchy is a reflection, and it's like all evil and it's all bad. But it's like, it is, if it is, then it must be here for a reason. So why is it? Let's integrate, harmonize, and unite those aspects that are positive and those aspects that are wanting to be lifted into some kind of, what is the highest benefit here? What is the highest procedural recalibration possible?
and the three words that come to me are coherence, signal, and integration. The idea that each group, each individual, each tribe, each nation has its signature, and it takes time to translate them into meaningfulness to each other. And that in that translation, there's the opportunity and possibility for integration. And the integration is not the mean, it's not the middle ground, it's the most peaks that can be reached collectively, so that each person gets their highest for a period to explore what's possible if you are given that sovereignty, facility, and possibility. What would you do with it? How would it be beneficial for everyone? Is it going to be? Let's give you the baton for a period of time, because we've come to this conclusion that this is the right way to be. And I know that we're kind of building towards closing, and I have this inspiration that I want to share that I think is hilarious.
Please.
And it came to me one time. It was this idea of janitotalitarianism.
Janitor?
Janitor. So the idea is that there's something that needs to be cleaned. There's something that needs to be addressed. Okay, we've got nuclear stockpile. It's irradiating the oceans. The bottom fed creatures are all dying. They feed like there's some systemic thing that is by its very nature degrades the value of life.
It's decaying also.
It's decay, it's destruction, it's delirium inducing, it's whatever it is. There's this one world viewpoint where every nation and every person says the quality of the oxygen has to improve. So every single human being on the planet will plant 100,000 trees in their next 5 years. And we're going to reap whatever it is. It could be any of 1,000 things, but there's one thing that the entire world agrees to clean up. And until it is achieved, it is the singular focus. Everything else continues. Everyone's doing their thing. There's still wars going on. But every single human being coordinates to deal with this one thing until its completion.
Love that.
And that image came to me. It was like, but it's totalitarian. No one can get away from it. If you're not doing it, there's fines. If you're not doing it, there's prison time. Like, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And there's a cost for not doing it.
Man, may I share what that installed in me?
Absolutely.
It's one of these projects that I've been looking at because, I moved back here to the ranch as kind of home base. And now I'm just like, all right, I think I'm a genius and I'm going to work with Kanye and I'm really good. Prove it. Shut up. All these projects that Ted has, they're kind of just sitting there. And then he's like, I'm going to do a podcast. Okay, everybody, I'm on a podcast. It's like, Dad, no, that's just your phone. And you're just doing a Facebook Live. Like, he thinks this is a podcast. I need some help. Oh my God. We needed like lighting and camera. Like, let's settle down. He has this company called Camp for Kids, and they've planted like something over 50,000 trees in the past 10 years or something like that. Like over 20 camps in different states. And I don't know how many kids, but you just started talking about this and I'm like, all right, I put the deck together. There's some other stuff I'd love to tell you about offline, but there's these other projects that people are asking him about. And then him and his team are like, Rocco, deal with it or do something about it, or else it's not going to happen, or we don't care enough. And I'm like, whoa. So I make a pitch deck, and a pitch deck really is just meant to begin a design language conversation and hopefully steer it towards what's the most high thing that could come about it. But anyways, when you're saying this, I'm like, wow, I need to make a pitch deck and like somehow get him on and his team on board and like everybody that he's ever interfaced with through this organization, which is a nonprofit 501c3, and be like some type of spring 2022 challenge or something. And like, I don't know if the incentive is like, how many trees can you plant? But like, what if each one of the camps in different states planted, if they got like 50 kids, which I think every one of them has over 50 kids. Like can we plant like several thousand trees this upcoming spring? That would be a fun like incentive thing.
Yeah, it brings me back to square one, like where we started, which is great. It's like we're really here to carry the magic tricks of our family forward. My
Hmm.
father was a fencer. I became a stuntman. You
Ooh,
know, my father was a psychologist working in a prison to give people the tools to be able to get out of their oppression. He worked on Skid Row to get drunks to like rebuild their lives, and I'm a cultural creator that is, essentially designing possibilities in the creative realm for people to be able to move their lives forward. I am a continuation of the signal that my father was, and I carry his magic tricks forward, and
man.
I refine them, and I
Right.
build on them. And
Evolve them.
have a very, you have a father who has a mountaintop, and on that mountaintop he has a number of different, spell books that are as yet unfinished, and they're not fully formed. And in part you may say, well, actually, some of this is necromancy. This is like, magic I don't like. But in writing your spell code on top of what is in his books, you can refine the magic of the legacy of the Nugent,
Man.
and it's a banner. You're a bannerman for your father. I'm a bannerman for my father, and we carry our legacy forward.
Hmm.
So whatever there is in the world that is of your family, because you're now living there, that you can carry forward, yeah, that's a great vehicle for you to get clear in your vision of what's possible, to include the storyline of your family and legacy. And that's not always easy to do, but because of the quality of your family, there's a lot to integrate, there's a lot to transform, there's a lot to
Trans-
develop
translate.
and translate to value, because your father is someone that is largely misunderstood and also largely understood. On a visceral level, there are many people that agree and understand who he is. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of resistance to him, And so being able to be that translation force for as long as it takes, because you don't want to live in your father's shadow forever, but you do want to be able to mirror the lens. You want to lens and mirror the value of what he's put into the world that has enough to teach you your next step.
I say. Powerful poetry, brother.
It's good fun. Thank you so
Good
much
fun.
for the opportunity. I
Man.
hope this finds a venue. I hope that the people who end up hearing this and listening to this, are drawn to continue to follow the works that we are initiating, that we are doing in the world, and that our signals get fed, and that
Yeah.
we continue in our legacy and the development of our legacy,
Yes.
whether it's for our children or whether it's for the world, depending on what we do in our lives,
Yes.
that it's for this unfoldment, and the refinement of our offerings.
Yes.
Thanks for the
Our
opportunity.
our magic trick.
Yeah.
Yes. Anything that you'd like to bring to attention in your world, or as a closing thing, anything that you're working on that you'd like to bring attention to, or send attention to? You mentioned many great books that I hope everyone gets a chance to look at as well.
Yeah, we can maybe, in whatever the liner notes, just look below for a set of references. um for me, I'm moving into uh trying to explore, because of the COVID times, um how live streaming can be more valuable in these times. I've taken on a job with a group called 17 Live. And I will be exploring that and looking for people to kind of continue to develop their language. Um, in terms of my work, I'd love people to watch the first 3 episodes of C. Check out my, work on that show.
Please watch
I
it.
worked all the way on, I worked all the way through it, but those 3 episodes, at least, get, watch
Woo!
the beginning of it.
That's some good stuff.
Um, yeah, and I don't have anything immediately to promote. It's just, I will be developing these different kinds of initiatives around, what is the technological interface for sharing on this kind of level, that we can continue to evolve out in this time, so that people really, get the counsel that they need and deserve to be able to, work together collectively.
Powerfully said. Brother Buddha, thank you for your time. Thank you for your lens. Your magic trick is instantaneously useful, valuable, appreciated, and gratefully received. Um, Love you, and I look forward to continuing this wherever that's meant to happen.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate spending the time with you.
Likewise, brother. Much more soon, I'm sure. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. Blessings. Till next
Peace.
time.